From pop culture to politics, this is the Michael Medved Show.
And another great day in this greatest nation on God's green earth, a great nation that yesterday had primary elections in states across the country. We'll talk about the highlights of what it is that the voters of this great country were trying to say to the people who lead us as elected representatives. We will get to that. There is also new news on the ceasefire that has been going on for weeks and weeks now with Iran. It's not much of a ceasefire. There has been a great deal of violence between Iran and the United States. And there's also a brand new poll showing that President Trump's approval rating is now lower than Biden ever received during his brief one-term presidency. There is also a poll showing that most Americans say they are proud to be American, but they are worried that the signers, if they were to see what the situation is in our country today, would be disappointed. Speaking of disappointed, a heated debate, and we will play the highlights of it for you, in Congress between a member of the House and a leading member of the Senate on President Trump's sleeping habits. We're not talking about his sleeping habits at 4 a.m. because, no, he's busy doing his internet work at that time of night. But we're talking about President Trump's sleeping habits while he is supposedly on the job in the middle of the day. This is suddenly a controversy between Republicans and Democrats with an unpredictable resolution. Meanwhile, the realities, Ebrahim Rizai, who is a spokesman for the National Security and Foreign Policy Committee in the Iranian parliament, says that Americans have shown that they understand the language of missiles better than the language of diplomats. Damn, he said, the Navy and Aerospace Force kids of the IRGC, the Iranian Republic Guard Corps, are fired up. Okay. Meanwhile, the U.S. and Iran have traded strikes in one of the biggest nights of attacks since the ceasefire began in April. Isn't that amazing? We went through the entire month of May with a ceasefire going on. Didn't feel like that because the war is still a factor and that Strait of Hormuz is still not open. The events of last night, the strikes by Iran against U.S. targets and by the U.S. against Iranian targets, those exchange of attacks further strained already fragile negotiations. Well, the fragile negotiations were kind of called off by the Iranians. It is simply not true what President Trump has said repeatedly, that they are desperate for a settlement, that they want a settlement. They aren't acting like it. Last night's hostilities appear to have begun when the U.S. used a Hellfire missile to strike an oil tanker heading for an Iranian port. Meanwhile, the New York Times reported Iran fired a barrage of missiles and drones at Kuwait early today, including a strike that killed a civilian and injured scores of others at the country's international airport. So the Kuwaiti authorities said. The strike left one of the airport's terminals ablaze and with a gaping hole in its roof. And it's terrible when you think about what the United States went through to liberate Kuwait after it had been occupied by Saddam Hussein and the forces of Iraq. And now you look at the devastation that is hitting their airport and their effort to capitalize on some of their oil wealth. It's sad. And it certainly indicates one of the problems with this war, which is the devastating impact on some of our Arab allies, that is something that President Trump should have been more aware of. The barrage was one of the biggest attacks on a Gulf nation since the U.S.-Iran ceasefire took effect in April. And it showed that Iran still had the ability to inflict damage on its neighbors. Tehran has attacked major energy exporters and trade hubs since the beginning of the war to punish U.S. allies. To punish them for what? Because they are supporting the rest of the world in trying to, the idea that they should be surprised that nations like Kuwait, which is a U.S. ally, that they actually are supporting limitations on Iran's nuclear program. This just indicates why it's so crucial to oppose that nuclear program. This is the way they are behaving without nuclear weapons. How would they behave using those nuclear weapons if they had them? Tehran has attacked major energy exporters and trade hubs since the beginning of the war to punish, it says, U.S. allies and increase economic pressure on the Trump administration. Negotiations aimed at reopening the vital shipping lanes of the Strait of Hormuz have dragged on without a resolution. The fresh hostilities came, as President Trump said in an interview with the New York Post, published today, that Iran's supreme leader, the Ayatollah Mojtaba Khamenei, who has not been seen in public for months, was involved somehow in the negotiations to end the war. Mr. Trump said he hoped to meet with him. Good luck with that. He's about as elusive, Ayatollah Mojtaba Khamenei, as Congressman Tom Keene of New Jersey, who hasn't been seen since March 5th and has been hiding out somewhere with a mysterious illness of some kind. He won his primary, by the way. He will be in the general election as the Republican standard bearer in a district in New Jersey. The United States and Iran have launched a series of attacks in recent days, reports the New York Times. And both sides claim a ceasefire remains in effect, though neither side is respecting that ceasefire, apparently. The U.S. military has described its actions as self-defense, while Iran has said it is retaliating for American attacks. The U.S. Central Command said in a statement today that Iran had also launched missiles and drones at Bahrain, another allied nation, today, as well as at civilian mariners in nearby waters. Those attacks did not hit their targets, the military said. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps said it had targeted the headquarters of the U.S. Fifth Fleet in Bahrain and an American vessel it identified as the Panaya. I'm not even sure what that vessel was attempting to achieve. The Financial Post is reporting that the risk that Iran is covertly pursuing nuclear weapons even now is higher today than before the United States and Israel launched their first military attacks on the Islamic Republic a year ago. That would be the Operation Midnight Hammer, not even Epic Fury yet. This according to Western officers who cited new data circulated by the United Nations Atomic Watchdog. In other words, we have achieved nothing with this war so far. More on that, on the hostage-taking in California at a bank. We will get to that and much more coming up on The Medved Show. And on the Michael Medved Show, we can now report that the individual who took several people hostage at a Bakersfield, California bank building is now dead. and all of the hostages have been freed, police said earlier today, following a roughly 15-hour standoff. And yes, it sounds like a movie. It sounds like any number of movies. The suspect had barricaded himself inside the building at 1 p.m. yesterday, local time, prompting a massive law enforcement response that involved crisis negotiations and the FBI. And this is actually good news regarding the FBI, of which there hasn't been that much recently. The individual who committed this hostage taking was pronounced dead at the scene following an officer-involved shooting with FBI personnel, Bakersfield police said in a statement. The suspect had taken, quote, several community members, that means customers, basically, probably some bank employees too, but two of the hostages were released yesterday. The rest were found in the building unharmed and received medical care at the scene. It was not immediately clear how many people had been taken hostage. The investigation remains ongoing. The situation began when police received a call about a bomb threat. Officials had said earlier that there were no reports of injuries and the hostages were in good health. Well, that's good, and it does indicate, yes, there is a role for the FBI and that they have enough FBI resources close to Bakersfield, which is obviously it's a very separate community north of Los Angeles. But the happy ending is finally a win for Kash Patel. I don't think he can claim any personal credit, but it's something in his behalf. And speaking of Kash Patel and unqualified people in very crucial resources, there is an editorial today in the Washington Post that I think bears attention. The editorial says somehow President Donald Trump managed to find someone less qualified than Tulsi Gabbard to replace her as interim director of national intelligence. Gabbard is a former congresswoman and a military veteran. But Bill Pulte, who was named yesterday by Trump, we reported it here on the show, is a partisan sycophant who has none of the, quote, extensive national security expertise that the law actually requires of a DNI nominee, Director of National Intelligence. In other words, we're talking about somebody being in charge of all the intelligence that decides war and peace, all the information coming in about what's going on in Iran, for instance, and about their construction or attempted construction of nuclear weapons, that goes through the office of DNI. And right now we have a guy appointed, a young man, he's not even 40 yet, but he has zero experience in the intelligence community, in the military, or in national security of any kind. It says in the Washington Post that Pulte has used his privileged access to mortgage records as director of the Federal Housing Finance Agency to ingratiate himself with Trump by championing lawfare against the president's perceived enemies, including taking action against Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook and New York Attorney General Letitia James, and Senator Adam Schiff, who is one of Trump's least favorite people in the world. They have all been victims of partisan efforts by Bill Pulte, who's now the Director of National Intelligence, They point out in the Washington Post, being DNI, Director of National Intelligence, isn't a part-time job. The director is charged with coordinating the country's 18 spy agencies, who end up, by the way, using literally hundreds of billions of dollars of taxpayer money. But Trump said that Pulte plans to stay on as director of the Federal Housing Finance Agency, as well as chairman of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, which have nothing to do with national intelligence, nor should they. Trump didn't say whether he plans to nominate Pulte, which would require Senate confirmation. Enough Republicans would likely object that he couldn't make it through. Under the Vacancies Act, Pulte may serve 210 days before being confirmed by the Senate. That would let him stay on at this job until early next year. The thing about being confirmed by the Senate is right now there are a bunch of senators, Republican senators, who are very likely to be skeptical about this appointment. Why? Because you have people like Senators Bill Cassidy of Louisiana, Dr. Bill Cassidy, and Senator John Cornyn of Texas, and you have Tom Tillis, Senator Tillis of North Carolina. These are three current senators who were crushed and basically driven out of the Senate and driven out of the Republican Party by Trump's desire to end their service. I mean, you think that John Cornyn, who lost his race in Texas, largely because Trump, at the last moment, endorsed his opponent. Do you think that he necessarily is going to go for this nomination of Bill Pulte? There's a real chance his nomination could be turned down. Trump didn't say whether he plans to nominate Pulte, which would require Senate confirmation. Enough Republicans, says the Post, would likely object that he couldn't make it through. Under the Vacancies Act, he may serve 210 days before being confirmed by the Senate. That's more than enough time to inflict damage on an intelligence community, writes the Washington Post, that is supposed to stay outside the political fray. A good director of national intelligence is willing to speak truth to power. Even if Trump has some legitimate frustrations with the intelligence community dating back to his 2016 campaign a decade ago, unleashing Pulte is not going to lead to better and more objective intelligence. His presence will undermine or at least cast doubt on the credibility of the intelligence community's work product. And what about Tulsi Gabbard? She is leaving voluntarily her position as Director of National Intelligence, for which she was very, very thinly qualified. She's leaving because her husband is suffering from a cancer diagnosis, and she wants to spend time with him. And on the Michael Medved show, there is a report in the Wall Street Journal that President Trump is retreating from the proposal to set up a $1.776 billion anti-weaponization slush fund as a settlement of his lawsuit against the Internal Revenue Service. We're not moving forward with the fund, period, said the acting Attorney General Todd Blanche to Congress yesterday. Not moving forward, that isn't dead for good, says a Wall Street Journal editorial. That isn't dead for good, and it isn't enough. Republicans in Congress, they report, can kill the idea forever, however, by borrowing money for its use. That would be good policy and good politics. The settlement, in quotes, between Mr. Trump and his own administration, diverting $1.8 billion of tax money to political allies who would all get an apology for having pleaded guilty or having been found guilty of rioting on January 6th. That would be an ugly precedent. The courts have blocked the payouts for now, and the Justice Department said this week it will abide by that blockage. But it isn't stopping another headline. The headline says Pentagon hires convicted January 6th rioter for sensitive counterterrorism job. There aren't enough people in America to get this kind of job. The story in the Washington Post, a convicted January 6th rioter who later said that he regretted his participation in the U.S. Capitol attack, has been hired by the Trump administration to work inside a Pentagon office that manages highly classified military operations. That, according to 4 people who are familiar with the matter. The appointment of Ilyas Irizarry, who was 19 years old at the time of the riot in January 6, 2021. The appointment of Mr. Irizarry to the post in the Defense Department's Special Operations and Low-Intensity Conflict Office has raised alarm internally among staff who question how anyone convicted in the assault on American democracy on January 6th to try to overturn an election could be trusted for such a sensitive role in the U.S. government. All of the 4 people who are Pentagon staffers of some kind all spoke on the condition of anonymity, citing a fear of retaliation. Irizarry is assigned to the office's Irregular Warfare and Counterterrorism section. The people familiar with the matter said the team comprises about 40 people, and its portfolio includes operations such as embassy security, personnel recovery, and hostage rescue. 2 people characterized the work as among the most delicate that the Pentagon performs. All positions, they said, require a top secret security clearance. In a statement, the acting Pentagon press secretary, whose name is Joel Valdez, said that Irizarry is a, quote, qualified, patriotic young professional, and we are proud to have him as a political appointee at the Defense Department. And by saying that he's a political appointee at the Defense Department, isn't that implying that the government approves his record of rioting against the Capitol building? It is unclear who within the Trump administration appointed him to this post, though you'd have to suspect that it's Pete Hegseth who officially runs the Pentagon and the, as he would call it, the Department of War. At the time of the Capitol attack, Mr. Irizarry was a freshman at the Citadel, a public military college in South Carolina, and he was serving as a cadet in the Civil Air Patrol. He's 19. After traveling to Washington with 2 other men, Irizarry joined the mob of Donald Trump supporters who breached police lines and broke into the building while members of Congress attempted to certify Joe Biden's victory in the 2020 presidential election. An election where, by the way, he won the popular vote by 7 million votes, okay? Just a reminder. Prosecutors said that along with the crowds, Mr. Irizarry entered through a broken window while wielding a metal pole, but there's no evidence that he ever struck anyone with that metal pole or anything else. Irizarry pleaded guilty to a misdemeanor charge of entering and remaining in a restricted building or grounds, and he was sentenced to 14 days in jail, court filings show, which seems like a very mild sentence for such an outrageous crime. The judge in his case described him as someone who at critical moments on January 6th, such as when one of these traveling companions, Grayson Sherrill, struck a police officer with a pole, he did nothing to stop the violence. Sherrill was sentenced to 7 months in custody in 2023 after pleading guilty to assaulting federal officers. Arizari apologized to the widows of several law enforcement officers who lost their lives, who he said had to bury their partners because of that horrible day. Okay, at least he's admitting or acknowledging that it was a horrible day. And that's important. He said at his sentencing, which was in 2023, "I am ashamed because I will always be a part of this disgrace," Arizari said at his sentencing. January 6th represented something truly horrible. It was the largest attack on our democracy since the Civil War. And that at least is more of a recognition than the President of the United States has given, isn't it? And it's why right now, given the fact that he's been appointed to this job, it isn't as outrageous as it sounds originally, because there has been a recognition of doing wrong. Arizari's record before the Capitol attack had been quite commendable. A U.S. District Judge, Tanya Chutkan, noted at his sentencing. She offered at the time to write him a letter to help him to reapply to the Citadel after the school discharged him for his involvement in the assault. And glad he got back into the school. Since graduating, Arizari ran unsuccessfully for a South Carolina state legislative seat, losing in the 2024 Republican primary. But he will be doing his job in the Pentagon. What he said was, "While you see me today as a result of my foolish mistake, I hope that you will see me again someday and be proud of what you see." Proud might be too strong a word, but accepting might be more appropriate. We'll be right back on the Medved Show. And on the Michael Medved Show, there was apparently a testy phone call between the leader of the United States, Donald John Trump, and Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel. The whole idea of the personal nature of this phone call and the angry nature of this phone call, they're reporting in Axios that one U.S. official said Trump told Netanyahu that following through on his threats to bomb the Lebanese capital would further isolate Israel around the world. Two of the sources said Trump claimed he'd helped keep Netanyahu out of jail, a reference to Trump's support during Netanyahu's corruption trial. That corruption trial has been going on for years, literally for years. And no, it does not look like he's going to be sent to jail at any time soon. But the reference to Trump's support for Netanyahu during the corruption trial, summarizing Trump's remarks to Netanyahu, the anonymous U.S. official said that President Trump said, "You're beep crazy. You'd be in prison if it weren't for me. I'm saving your ass. And everybody hates you now. Everybody hates Israel because of this." A second source briefed on the call said Trump was pissed and at one point yelled at Netanyahu, "What the beep are you doing? Driving the news, the U.S. official said Trump knew Hezbollah had been shooting at Israel and that Israel needed to defend itself, but felt in recent days that Netanyahu was escalating in a disproportionate way. In addition to the threats on Beirut, Israel has been expanding its ground operations in southern Lebanon to try to stop the firing of missiles on Israel's north. Another U.S. official said Trump was concerned by the fact that Israel had killed civilians in Lebanon and objected to the Israelis knocking down buildings to take out a single Hezbollah commander. Israel no longer plans to strike Hezbollah targets in Beirut, an Israeli official told Axios. And there is more on the state of the war in Iran, but it's become a war throughout the Middle East, unfortunately, which was everyone's fear. Scott McFarlane, who is a chief Washington correspondent for the Midas Touch Network, was on CNN, and he spoke about the pending Iran peace deal and indicated that we're actually watching a worldwide version of a childish game. Here's what he said. It's clip 17.
We are watching like the largest ever version, a worldwide version of a game of Chicken Little, where you have people who have to fund this war here in Washington who have no idea where peace negotiations are. You have members of Congress who are reading Truth Social posts to get guidance, and you see the Truth Social posts conflict with each other. I've talked to senators, Laura, who are concerned about the quantity of U.S. munitions right now. They know the bills are going to come due on this, and they don't know the trajectory. I don't think members of Congress like the briefings they're getting, at least the thoroughness of the briefings they're getting or not getting on the war, and the president's being, to put it charitably, less than clear where things are going.
Less than clear. There's also a perspective that Michael Oren, the former Israeli ambassador to Washington, D.C., that he offered on Fox News about the negotiations and their future. Here is former Ambassador Michael Oren, clip 3.
The individual goals that were set out both by the United States and Israel at the outset of this operation, of Epic Fury, Roaring Lion, were fourfold. One was to stop Iran's nuclear program, then to remove the nuclear stockpile. That includes a stockpile of 60% enriched uranium plus 20% enriched uranium, about 2,000 pounds. And then also to prevent Iran from developing intercontinental ballistic missile capabilities that would threaten Israel, all of our neighbors, and frankly, now Western Europe, because we know that those missiles can reach Western Europe. The Iranians lied about the range. And lastly, to prevent Iran from supporting terror. Terror, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, terrors around the world, carrying out terrorist attacks in Europe and in the United States. I was the target of one of those terrorist attacks in Washington, D.C. They didn't succeed, but they certainly tried. And over the course of the war, a fifth goal was added, and that is reopening the Strait of Hormuz. But certainly for Israel, the first four were essential. And those aren't just, those aren't goals of convenience. They go to our essential national security.
Okay, and Michael Oren also talked about the fact that it's tough to believe that Iran will keep its promises that are made in the course of any negotiation. This is a clip 5, more from Michael Oren.
Very concerned, Mark. I'll be very frank with you. I'm very concerned that if the regime is thrown a lifeline through sanction relief, through the unfreezing of frozen assets, you're talking about tens and tens of billions of dollars, then it will continue to fund Hezbollah, it will continue to fund Hamas, it will continue to build intercontinental ballistic missiles that have threatened us, and the Iranians will lie about their nuclear program the way they lied about the range of their ballistic missiles. They said, it only goes 2,000 kilometers. It turned out it went 4,000 kilometers and reached not just the Middle East, but parts of Europe. So you're dealing with a regime that lies and does want to just to destroy us. On the other hand, what's at stake is a possibility of an entirely different Middle East, of peace between Israel and Lebanon, peace between Israel and Syria, peace between Israel and Saudi Arabia, even peace between Israel and a post-Ayatollah Iran, and the restoration of a Pax Americana mark that would extend from the shores of the Mediterranean to the banks of the Ganges. That's what it would look like.
And that is a hope. And a last note about Iran's arsenal of about 8,000 ballistic missiles. How will they be used? What do they represent? This is clip 4.
The fact of the matter is that Iran wanted before this war to build up an arsenal of something in the order of 8,000 of these ballistic missiles. And what I understand, your listeners should know what we mean by a ballistic missile. In the room next to me, I have my family bomb shelter, and that bomb shelter can withstand a direct hit from a missile from Hezbollah or from Hamas. It packs around about 100 to 300 pounds of TNT, but these ballistic missiles carry about 2,000 pounds of TNT, and it will take down not just my safe room and this entire building, it'll take down the entire neighborhood. So imagine these 8,000 of these rockets coming at you, which will overwhelm our missile defense and create something close to an existential threat to the state of Israel. So the missile defense issue, the ballistic missile issue, is absolutely critical for us.
Okay, this is all occurring where the negotiations appear to be completely deadlocked, and going nowhere. Meanwhile, President Trump went on an unprecedented and unhinged social media posting spree. This is amazing when you think about it. The President of the United States, in the midst of the ongoing crisis in the Middle East, posted 45 posts in 1 hour. What did he post? The president 1 hour on his social media platform? And meanwhile, there's more. Russia launched a large-scale deadly attack early today, on Tuesday, on Kyiv as part of a broad offensive on targets across Ukraine, authorities said. At least 17 people were killed in the assault that Ukraine's military said involved more than 600 drones and dozens of missiles, including advanced hypersonics. That reported by CNN. And meanwhile, we have a primary, not just in California, but primaries across the country. What do they point to for the political future of this greatest nation on God's green earth? That and more coming up.
Listeners love Michael Medved.
I listen to you occasionally when I'm driving. It turns my stomach every time I do. Lately, you've been sounding like a raving lunatic. You upset me so much. You never tell the truth.
I truly believe you're delusional.
You don't have a clue.
You're wrong again.
What's going on in your head? You are no good for the country.
People like you who are a monster. Have you no shame?
The Michael Medved Show.